Elizabeth I, often called the Virgin Queen or Gloriana, is celebrated as a powerful monarch who navigated both peace and war. But beneath the image of this revered figure lies a temperament as fierce as her father's. Raised in the aftermath of tragic circumstances, including the execution of her mother, Anne Boleyn, and the cold desire of her father, Henry VIII, for a male heir, Elizabeth's early life could have shaped her into a kinder, more sympathetic leader. Yet, the turmoil she faced during her childhood, especially after her mother's beheading, made her a more complex figure than one might expect. Elizabeth was born on September 7th, 1533, as the longed-for male heir, but instead was a daughter. Though her mother's fortunes declined, Elizabeth was raised with royal care. Living at Hatfield House, she spent more time with her household than her royal parents, shaping her upbringing. At just 2 years old, Elizabeth witnessed the execution of her mother, Anne Boleyn, on charges now considered dubious. Though this event may have traumatised her, Elizabeth rarely spoke of it and maintained a positive view of her father, Henry VIII. She honoured Anne's memory by supporting her relatives at court and wearing a locket with her portrait. Just 11 days after Anne's death, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. But in 1544, when Elizabeth was 9, her father invited her and her half-sister Mary to dine with him at Pergo Park. Henry, impressed by his daughter, reversed the decision to remove them from the succession, restoring both girls' rights to the throne after their brother Edward. Elizabeth began to see her father in a new light, no longer the tyrant who had murdered her mother, but as a strong, loving leader. From Henry, she learned that being loved by the people could grant immense power and freedom. The death of Henry VIII in 1547 marked a new chapter for Elizabeth. Her stepmother Catherine Parr married Thomas Seymour, and Elizabeth, at just 14, lived with them. Thomas's inappropriate behaviour, such as entering her room early in his nightgown, alarmed her. Although Catherine dismissed it, she eventually caught them in an embrace, ending the situation. After Catherine's death, Seymour focused on Elizabeth, attempting to marry her and overthrow Edward Seymour. This led to his arrest and execution in 1549. The event taught Elizabeth to avoid dangerous associations, making her more cautious and wary of men, shaping her future decisions. When Elizabeth's younger brother, Edward VI, died in 1553, Elizabeth must have watched closely as Lady Jane Grey briefly ascended the throne, before being toppled by Mary I. Elizabeth's eventual rise to power was shaped by the tumultuous events of her youth. As Mary III's reign began, Elizabeth, once again thrust into the political arena, remained keenly aware of the dangers of court politics. Mary's faith remained strong despite her father's reforms, and she secretly practiced Catholicism. Influenced by her mother, she sought to restore England to the papacy. In contrast, Elizabeth, raised Protestant, outwardly conformed to the state religion, but sought a balance between Catholicism and Protestantism, shaping her religious settlement to unite both sides. Despite efforts to balance religious tensions, Elizabeth became a target for Protestant factions. Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain in 1554 fueled anti-Catholic sentiment, especially as Englishmen fought in Spain's wars. This unpopular foreign conflict influenced Elizabeth's future marriage decisions, as she sought to avoid any union that could threaten her sovereignty. Mary's marriage to Philip sparked Wyatt's rebellion, and Elizabeth was suspected of involvement. Fearing further plots, Mary summoned her to court. Elizabeth tried to avoid it, but eventually appeared in February. With no evidence, Mary imprisoned her sister in the Tower of London. The tower reminded Elizabeth of her mother, Anne Boleyn, and the looming threat of death. On March 18th, she was taken there, fearing for her life. Thanks to her supporters, Elizabeth was released in May and placed under house arrest, learning the dangers of religious division. In April 1555, Elizabeth was allowed to return to court. By then, Mary was rumoured to be pregnant, but Elizabeth remained the heir apparent. When it was revealed that Mary's pregnancy was likely a false one, the situation shifted, and Elizabeth seemed to be the next in line. In 1558, Mary again believed she was pregnant, but this turned out to be another illness. On November 6th, Elizabeth was officially recognised as Mary's heir, And just a few weeks later, on November 17, 1558, Mary passed away, leaving Elizabeth to assume the throne at the age of 25. Elizabeth's coronation was a moment of celebration, marking the beginning of her reign. As she made her way through the streets of London, the procession featured displays of Protestant symbolism. Though Elizabeth herself was publicly Protestant, she retained many Catholic influences, such as a love for candles and music, while disliking the long Protestant sermons. Elizabeth's reign was characterised by balancing religious tensions, something she had learned through her experiences with her siblings. Despite being publicly Protestant, Elizabeth sought to avoid alienating Catholics. She was acutely aware of the political ramifications of marrying a foreign ruler, such as Philip's influence over Mary's reign. Elizabeth knew that marriage would always come with compromises, regardless of any agreements to limit foreign influence. Her religious settlement aimed to find a middle ground, promoting the Church of England while accommodating both Protestant and Catholic versions of communion. The revived heresy laws were repealed, but the Church of England was officially recognised as the state religion. The Act of Uniformity made church attendance and the use of the 1552 Book of Common Prayer compulsory, though penalties for non-compliance were not severe, allowing Catholics to practice their faith discreetly. As a monarch, Elizabeth faced the constant pressure of securing an heir. While many believed that an heir would ensure stability, Elizabeth was reluctant to marry for fear of weakening her own power, as Mary's marriage to Philip had done. Her closest heir was Mary, Queen of Scots, who was a Catholic and a potential rival for the throne. Although Elizabeth had a cordial relationship with her, Parliament was hesitant about Mary's Catholicism, fearing her claim to the throne. The remaining Grey sisters, Catherine and Mary, were also potential heirs, favoured by Parliament due to their Protestantism and connection to the Tudor line. However, Elizabeth had little affection for them, viewing them as a threat to her reign. Elizabeth I was a monarch who wielded power with regal authority, yet she had a difficult relationship with the growing influence of her government. As Queen, she understood the importance of keeping her options open. Elizabeth was a master of the balancing act, skillfully managing the interests of the state, while navigating personal desires. Her role as Queen meant that the choices of those closest to her, such as her relatives, had far-reaching consequences. The marriages of her cousins, Catherine and Mary Grey, were of great importance to Elizabeth. Unfortunately, both women made secret marriages that Elizabeth found unsuitable. Catherine's marriage, in particular, strengthened her own claim to the throne, while Mary married beneath her social standing. Elizabeth's furious reaction to these unions, locking both women in the Tower of London and placing them under house arrest, has been criticised by many as cruel and excessive. Some contemporary critics argued that the women were simply acting out of love, and that Elizabeth's anger stemmed from bitterness and jealousy. While there may have been some truth to these accusations, Elizabeth's decisions also reflected the complex political landscape she navigated daily. At the heart of Elizabeth's personal struggles was her love for Robert Dudley. By 1559, it was evident to the Queen's courtiers that she had deep feelings for Dudley, though their relationship remained flirtatious and platonic. Despite this, the idea of marrying Dudley posed significant problems. The most pressing issue was that Dudley was already married. In 1560, his wife Amy died under mysterious circumstances after reportedly falling down the stairs. Though Dudley was cleared of any involvement in her death, rumours persisted that she had been murdered to clear the way for him to marry Elizabeth. A marriage to Dudley would have severely damaged Elizabeth's reputation and standing, but the Queen continued to entertain the idea. Her advisors, however, opposed the match. Marrying one of her subjects was a controversial notion, and they feared the influence Dudley might gain as the Queen's husband. Dudley's connection to the executed John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, also raised concerns. John Dudley had been a central figure in the failed attempt to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne. In 1578, when Dudley secretly married Lettice Knowles, Elizabeth's anger was palpable. The Queen effectively banished Lettice from the court, cutting her off from social circles and prospects. Elizabeth must have felt a deep sense of betrayal, torn between her love for Dudley and her duty to rule the kingdom. His marriage to her cousin likely served as a painful reminder of what Elizabeth could never have: a fulfilling relationship with the man she loved. Elizabeth's reactions to Catherine and Mary Grey's marriages likely stemmed from both personal feelings and political considerations. She knew that marriage could strengthen her position on the throne and provide her with crucial allies. Had Catherine and Mary married men whom Elizabeth could trust, their marriages could have reinforced her rule. However, by keeping them at a distance, Elizabeth ensured that their actions could not undermine her authority. As a woman in a man's world, Elizabeth faced the added challenge of establishing her authority. Many of her contemporaries questioned her ability to lead as a woman, especially in a time when power was often passed through male heirs. The punishments she inflicted on Catherine and Mary Grey, including their confinement and the attention paid to their potential heirs, reflected not only political strategy, but also Elizabeth's personal frustration with her own lack of a clear successor. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth entertained numerous suitors, many of whom were foreign princes. The most notable of these were from Scandinavian countries, including King Eric XIV of Sweden, Prince Adolf of Holstein-Gottorp, and King Frederick II of Denmark. Other potential matches included Charles II, a relative of Philip II of Spain, and Henry, Duke of Anjou, who later became King Henry III of France. At the age of 39, with the prospect of bearing a child diminishing, Elizabeth's hopes of marrying were increasingly unlikely. By 1581, Francis, Duke of Anjou, was the only suitor to visit Elizabeth in person. The two appeared to be close, and Elizabeth seemed to enjoy the attention from the young prince. Her Privy Council initially supported the idea of the union, as it could have forged an alliance against Spain, which was seen as a threat to both England and France. However, as the years passed, more of Elizabeth's advisors grew sceptical, and the potential marriage was ultimately called off. Elizabeth's reluctance to marry reflected her complex position as a monarch who had to weigh the political implications of her choices carefully. Elizabeth's decision to remain unmarried and childless led her to embrace the persona of the Virgin Queen, married to her country and people. This was seen by many as a strategic and wise move, reinforcing her authority and allowing her to remain a powerful, independent ruler. Yet it must have also been a source of personal sadness for Elizabeth. She was raised to believe that marriage and motherhood were part of a woman's duty, and the fact that she would not fulfill these roles must have weighed heavily on her heart. Despite the many rumours surrounding her virginity, especially in connection with her close relationship with Dudley, Elizabeth's reign proved her ability to thrive as an unmarried monarch. However, the doubts and whispers about her personal life never truly faded. As she continued to lead England, Elizabeth's refusal to marry became part of her legacy as a ruler who prioritised her country over personal desires. It's likely that even an illegitimate heir would have eventually been brought into the conversation about who would succeed Elizabeth's throne. Catholics who wanted to see Elizabeth removed from power refused to believe she was the Virgin Queen, spreading accusations that she had slept with her courtiers. These slanders must have stung, not only because Elizabeth had to turn her decision to stay unmarried into a positive one, viewing herself as married to her country, but also because she faced accusations that many women today still deal with, being branded as immoral and loose. While Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, was never criticised for his many mistresses or marriages, his main grievance was breaking away from the Catholic Church. Elizabeth faced a different standard. Women were thought to be emotionally driven, incapable of ruling with logic or reason. The implication was that if a woman slept with a man, she would lose her ability to govern with sound judgment. Men, on the other hand, were believed to be rational at all times. Thus, these accusations were not just an insult to her character, but also to her ability to rule effectively. Having trustworthy men around her would have helped bolster Elizabeth's public image as a capable ruler. It is possible that Elizabeth's spiteful and sometimes cruel behaviour toward women in her court was a reaction to the power dynamics in play. When male advisors married, their priorities shifted, and Elizabeth may have felt that their loyalty and ideas about their own positions had changed. Her anger might have been directed toward their wives, not only because she resented losing their undivided attention, but also because she needed their support for her survival in a male-dominated court. Another possible explanation for her erratic behaviour was the aftermath of a smallpox outbreak in 1562. Although Elizabeth survived the deadly disease, she was left with visible pockmarks on her skin, which had long been praised for its flawless beauty. Her image, vital to her power and allure, took a blow. It was around this time that Elizabeth began using a dangerous cosmetic compound called Venetian ceruse, a mixture of vinegar and lead, to achieve pale and flawless skin. While the mixture could make the skin appear youthful and unblemished, it was highly toxic, leading to symptoms of lead and mercury poisoning. As Elizabeth aged, she needed heavier use of these cosmetics to maintain her youthful appearance. The more she used them, the more deadly the effects became. Symptoms of poisoning, such as memory loss, digestive problems, irritability, and depression, were evident in Elizabeth's later years. Her behaviour became more volatile, with increasingly venomous attacks on courtiers and servants. This change in demeanour may have been exacerbated by the toxic compound she was using to maintain her appearance. By the time Elizabeth had passed away in 1603, the public perception of her was mixed. She began her reign as a beloved and admired princess, widely regarded as one of Europe's most beautiful and eligible royal wives. However, by the end of her reign, while she had defeated the Spanish Armada and secured a sense of stability in her country, her later years were marked by financial struggles, a declining standard of living, and military actions in Ireland that tarnished her legacy. Despite her Protestant stance, Elizabeth refrained from intervening too much in the affairs of other Protestant countries. She was also remembered for her cruel treatment of women at court, particularly those who defied her by marrying without her consent. Much of Elizabeth's glowing reputation in the centuries after her death can be attributed to the unpopularity of her successor, James I of England. James, initially seen as a promising monarch, soon became unpopular, perceived as a Catholic sympathiser with a corrupt government. Between 1610 and 1620, a revival of Elizabeth's image took place, emphasising her successes and downplaying her flaws. Her image was bolstered by the triumphs of her reign, particularly her victory over the Spanish Armada, which became a symbol of her resistance against foreign invasion. Over time, Elizabeth became a national icon, seen as a symbol of England's cultural golden age, and as a queen who successfully navigated the challenges of her reign. Elizabeth I was undeniably a politically savvy and intelligent monarch. She understood the importance of surrounding herself with trusted advisors, even those who were not afraid to tell her difficult truths. She also recognised that a monarch's position was only secure as long as the people supported them. Despite her firm belief in her divine right to rule, Elizabeth was acutely aware of how easily a ruler could lose favour, and she made harsh decisions to preserve her throne. However, Elizabeth's position as a female monarch, along with the societal and personal pressures she faced, meant that her decisions were sometimes harsher than those of a king in her position. Her father's temper and her own physical deterioration in later years, fueled by toxic cosmetics, only intensified her reactions. Her jealousy and fear of losing her position likely contributed to her cruelty, particularly toward those who married without her approval. Elizabeth's behaviour must also be viewed in light of her unique circumstances. Had she been born a commoner, perhaps her temper would not have been as sharp, and her decisions less severe. Yet her position as queen required difficult choices that sometimes bordered on cruelty. Much of the negative perception of Elizabeth comes from the rumours spread by her political opponents, which often make it hard to separate fact from fiction. Ultimately, Elizabeth could be seen as both a cruel queen and a woman struggling to maintain her place in a world dominated by men. She was balancing extreme pressures and would lash out when she felt that control was slipping away. It is tempting to wonder why Elizabeth did not try to create more opportunities for the women at her court, perhaps taking them under her wing. But the truth is that such a course of action would have worked against her as queen in a time when men were seen as the only ones capable of logical reasonable thought. Elizabeth's strength lies in how she navigated a patriarchal world, managing to hold on to her royal position despite the obstacles she faced. Elizabeth I remains one of England's most successful monarchs. She reigned during a time of cultural and political turmoil, maintaining her power in the face of significant challenges. Her life and legacy are a mix of triumph and tragedy. She was a queen who did what was necessary to survive, but her actions were often marked by the complex human emotions of jealousy, sadness, and fear. Despite the flaws and difficulties of her reign, she was undoubtedly one of the most influential figures in English history. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with new content.